I didn't want to talk about this. Honestly, I tried to avoid it for months. But something kept me awake night after night, a quiet voice that wouldn't stop asking, "Why did you walk away?" I used to think silence could protect me, but silence became heavier than the truth itself. And now, I realize that maybe someone out there needs to hear this. Because sometimes the hardest thing to admit is that love can break you even when it looks perfect from the outside. Before we go deep into this, tell me something. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, because I want to know where the people who still believe in second chances are tuning in from. If you're still here, it means you haven't completely given up on the idea that broken things can be healed. And that alone says something powerful about you. Last year, I almost got married. There were invitations printed, families preparing, and a ring that felt heavier than any stage microphone I'd ever held. But a week before the ceremony, I called it off. Not because I was afraid of commitment, not because I didn't love her, but because something, or rather, someone forced me to see that the life I was building wasn't built on truth. That someone was Jimin. You see, when you're in this industry long enough, you learn to perform even when your heart isn't in rhythm. You smile when the camera flashes, you laugh when you're supposed to, and you convince yourself that if the world believes you're happy, maybe someday you will be. That's what I was doing. Everyone around me thought I was living my dream world tours, endorsements, a wedding on the horizon. But deep inside, I was disconnected. Then, one night, after rehearsal, Jimin asked me a question that no one else dared to ask. He said, "Are you sure this is what your heart wants, or just what your image wants?" I laughed at first. I told him not to be dramatic, but he didn't smile. He just looked at me with that quiet intensity he always has when he knows I'm lying to myself. That moment haunted me, because he was right. Let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever built something, a career, a relationship, a dream, only to realize you did it to please everyone except yourself? You tell yourself it's love, it's destiny, it's stability. But deep down, it's fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of disappointing others. Fear of facing the silence of your own truth. That's what was happening to me. When I think back, the warning signs were there. Taehyung had asked if I was rushing things. Namjoon had subtly reminded me that love without self-understanding turns into performance. Even Yoongi, who rarely comments on emotional stuff, told me over coffee one night, "You're too quiet lately, Jungkook. When you stop singing in private, it means something's wrong." I ignored them all, because I thought maturity meant proving I could handle life like everyone else, settle down, build a future, tick the boxes. But maturity without authenticity is just another mask. A few days before the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror and saw a stranger wearing my tuxedo. The reflection smiled, but the eyes were empty. And in that silence, I heard Jimin's voice again. "Are you sure this is what your heart wants?" That night, I went for a walk in the rain. No security, no camera, just me. The streets were quiet, except for the sound of water hitting pavement and my own heartbeat. I ended up near a small park, one that we used to train in during our trainee days. I sat on the swing, and memories came flooding in the hunger, the laughter, the pain, the brotherhood that built us. And I realized something. Somewhere along the way, I started living for applause instead of purpose. I started choosing what looked stable over what felt honest. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't ready for marriage. Not because I didn't want love, but because I hadn't yet learned how to love without losing myself. I remember going home, sitting on the floor, and praying, not the kind of prayer you say out loud, but the kind that trembles inside your chest. "If this isn't right, give me the courage to stop it," I whispered. And somehow, I did. The next morning, I called it off. Quietly, respectfully. But it felt like detonating a bomb inside my own life. The news spread faster than I could breathe. People speculated. Fans reacted. Headlines twisted the story into every possible narrative. And through it all, Jimin never said a word publicly. He just stayed near, quietly making sure I was okay. Here's the truth. I was angry at him for a while, because in saving me from a mistake, he also forced me to face who I really was. But over time, I realized that's what real love looks like. Not comfort, not approval, but truth. If you're listening right now, maybe you've had someone like that. Someone who told you something painful because they loved you enough to risk losing you. Maybe it was a friend, a parent, or even yourself? If so, hold on to that. Because truth spoken in love can sting, but it also sets you free. I want to share something deeper, something I learned in those months after everything collapsed. When life stops going the way you planned, it's easy to think you've failed. But sometimes failure is the only door that leads you to who you really are. During that season, the members became my mirror. Taehyung reminded me how to laugh again. Namjoon made me write, not lyrics for an album, but reflections from my soul. Yoongi taught me silence isn't weakness, it's alignment. Hoseo kept pushing me to dance, saying, movement heals what stillness hides. Jin cooked for me when I wouldn't eat, and Jimin checked in every night, just saying, you'll thank yourself later. They didn't treat me like a fallen star. They treated me like a brother rediscovering his gravity. That's when I realized family isn't just blood or contract. It's the people who see your fracture and choose to stay until you remember your own light. Let me ask you something right now. Have you been living for applause, for validation, for someone else's expectations? Are you wearing a smile that doesn't belong to you? If you are, I'm not judging you. I've been there. I still fight it some days. But listen carefully. The applause will fade. The spotlight will shift. And when it does, the only voice that matters will be the one inside saying, are you at peace with yourself? If that voice is quiet right now, don't panic. Silence isn't always emptiness. Sometimes silence is the space where healing begins. I want you to think of one thing you've been forcing in your life, maybe a relationship, a career move, a version of yourself that doesn't fit anymore. Write it down somewhere. And next to it, write this. It's okay to stop pretending. Because the moment you stop pretending, life starts breathing again. In those months after I called off the wedding, I learned more about love than I ever did in years of being in a relationship. I learned that love isn't just staying sometimes. It's walking away when staying would mean betraying your own soul. Jimin didn't destroy my engagement. He saved it not for her, not for the world, but for me. And if you've ever had to make a choice that looked like loss but was really liberation, you know exactly what I mean. You see, the world doesn't celebrate people who pause. It celebrates people who push. But what if your power is in the pause? What if your courage is in the confession that you're not okay? That's what I want to talk about next, not the end of that relationship, but what began after. Because ending that chapter didn't break me. It woke me up. Stay with me. Because the next part of this story, the one no one knows, might change the way you see love, loyalty, and yourself. When I ended the engagement, I thought I was walking into silence. But what I didn't realize was that silence can speak louder than any crowd. The first morning after, I woke up to a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from friends, family, my management, even people I hadn't spoken to in years, all asking the same question. Why? Some said they were proud of me for being brave. Others said I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But the truth was, none of them really knew what it felt like to breathe again after pretending for so long. The house felt emptier than ever. The ring was gone. The tuxedo was back in its box. And yet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. It was painful, yes, but it was honest. And honesty, I learned, is the most expensive piece you can ever buy. I remember sitting on my couch with Jimin the night after the news broke. We didn't talk much. He just handed me a cup of tea, looked at me, and said, "You did what you had to do." I nodded, pretending I understood, but deep down I was still angry. Angry at myself for letting it get that far, angry at him for being the reason I saw the truth. But over time, I realized the people who love you enough to challenge your illusions are the ones who actually save you from yourself. Have you ever had someone pull you out of a dream that wasn't real? It hurts. You wake up disoriented, confused, and part of you wishes they'd let you sleep. But they don't, because love isn't about comfort, it's about truth. I started to notice how life changed after that. Taehyung invited me on long drives at night, blasting old songs from our trainee years. Sometimes we didn't speak for hours. The silence between songs was the kind that healed, not the kind that hurt. Namjoon came over one day with a notebook and said, "Write everything down. Don't censor yourself." And I did. I filled pages with anger, regret, confusion, and somewhere in the middle of all that, I found forgiveness. Forgiveness for myself. You see, when we fail publicly, it's easy to let shame define us. People point fingers, they speculate, they assign motives, but no one knows what it takes to admit you were living wrong. And even fewer understand that courage isn't about fixing everything, it's about stopping long enough to start again the right way. I remember one night, Yoongi called me into his studio. He didn't say much, he just played a piano melody he'd been working on. It was raw, simple, almost unfinished. And after a while, he said, "Sometimes the most beautiful things aren't complete, they just exist honestly." I'll never forget that, because it reminded me that maybe I didn't ruin my story, maybe I just paused it at the wrong chapter to find the right one. During those weeks, J-Hope became the light in the room. He kept making jokes, dancing like nothing had changed, pulling me back to the rhythm of life. "You're still Jungkook," he said. Not Jungkook the groom, not Jungkook the idol, just Jungkook. And for the first time in months, I laughed, not for the camera, not for the fans, but for myself. Jin, being Jin, handled it in his own quiet way. He cooked for everyone, made dinner feel like a safe place again. At one point, he looked across the table and said, "You can't live your life trying to prove you're okay. You have to actually be okay." That line stuck with me more than any headline ever did. And then there was Jimin. He never asked me to thank him, never brought it up again. He just showed up at practice, at late night walks, at random hours when the world was asleep. He'd check in, smile faintly, and say, "You're healing, I can tell." I didn't realize how much that meant until one day, months later, he broke down in front of me. He said, "I was scared, you know. I thought you'd hate me forever for saying what I said." I told him, "I did, for a while, but you were right. And you probably saved me from a life that would have broken me." That moment changed something in both of us. Because sometimes, the act of saving someone else cost you, too. And he carried that quietly. You might be wondering why I'm telling you this now. It's because I know there's someone out there listening who feels trapped in a job, a relationship, an expectation, and you think walking away means you've failed. But hear me. Walking away from something wrong isn't failure. It's faith. It's believing that the pain of honesty is better than the comfort of pretending. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt alive? Not successful, not productive, alive. When was the last time you looked in the mirror and recognized the person staring back at you? If it's been a while, that's okay. Because maybe this is your moment to start again. The truth is, the life you thought you wanted might not be the life that's meant for you. And that's not loss, that's grace. Sometimes God doesn't take things away to punish you. He takes them away to protect you. There's something I've learned through all of this. Love isn't about possession. It's about alignment. If two people aren't aligned in truth, the bond becomes a performance. And no amount of smiles, photos, or rings can hide that. One night, I was talking to Namjoon again. He said, "Do you ever think the universe uses pain to realign us?" I said, "It feels cruel sometimes." He smiled and said, "It's not cruelty, it's calibration." That word stuck with me. Because maybe heartbreak isn't the end, maybe it's the moment the universe adjusts your soul back to its right frequency. After months of staying quiet, I started writing music again. Not about fame or heartbreak, but about rediscovery. I wrote about standing in the rain that night, about Jimin's question, about the silence that followed. I realized that sometimes the songs we never planned to write become the truest reflection of who we are. When the members heard the demo, they didn't say much. They just listened. At the end, Jimin wiped his eyes and said, "That's it. That's the sound of peace." You know, peace doesn't always sound like silence. Sometimes it sounds like honesty, echoing through a broken heart. If you're still listening right now, I want you to remember this. Your story isn't over just because one chapter closed. The ring I returned wasn't a symbol of failure. It was a reminder that timing matters. That love, no matter how deep, can't survive where truth isn't welcome. So, if you've ever had to walk away from something that looked right but felt wrong, I want to tell you you did the brave thing, the right thing, the human thing, because your heart deserves more than applause. It deserves alignment. And someday, when you finally meet the one who doesn't just understand your words but feels your silence, you'll know. You'll know that every heartbreak, every tear, every pause was preparing you for that moment. That's what I want to talk about next. The day everything changed, not because I found someone new, but because I finally found myself again. Stay with me. When you lose something you thought you couldn't live without, the world doesn't stop for you. The sun still rises, The fans still cheer, and the cameras still flash, but everything feels slightly out of sync. Like a song that's missing one note. Just enough for you to hear the emptiness. That's what it felt like in the weeks after I called off the wedding. I went to rehearsals, I smiled on stage, I did interviews, but inside, I was somewhere else standing in the echo of what could have been. It's strange how a quiet decision can create so much noise. Every headline wanted an answer. Every comment section turned into a courtroom. Everyone thought they knew why I did it. But no one really asked how it felt to lose something that everyone else thought was perfect. And the truth is, I didn't just lose a person. I lost the version of myself that thought perfection was peace. There's a moment every artist faces when the stage lights fade and you're left with the raw sound of your own breathing. That moment came for me one night in the studio. I was alone, staring at the microphone, realizing I'd been singing to escape myself, not to express myself. For years, my voice was the bridge between who I was and who people thought I should be. But now, I didn't want to perform anymore. I wanted to understand. That's when Jimin walked in. No cameras, no words, just presence. He sat down across from me, pulled out his phone, and played an old voice note. It was from 2016, me and him harmonizing off-key, laughing, arguing about notes, being kids again. Listen to that, he said. That's the sound of joy before the world taught us how to pretend. I didn't realize I was crying until he said softly, "You don't have to keep being who you were if it's killing who you are." That hit me harder than any breakup ever could. Because sometimes the person you need to forgive isn't the one who left. It's the one you became while trying to be loved. Let me ask you something. Have you ever woken up and realized you don't recognize the person in your reflection anymore? Maybe you're living a life that looks beautiful on the outside but feels hollow inside. Maybe you've been saying yes to things that make your soul whisper no. If that's you, listen to me. It's not too late to come home to yourself. I started making small changes. Waking up earlier. Walking without my phone. Eating meals without cameras around. I visited my parents more. I went to the countryside one weekend and sat by a river until the sun went down. And for the first time in years, I felt something simple, peace. Namjoon once told me that peace doesn't arrive like lightning. It arrives like dawn, slow, soft, unnoticed until the light touches everything. That's what those weeks felt like. A quiet dawn after a long storm. Then one night, Taehyung called. He said, "Let's go somewhere." No staff, no agenda. We drove until the city lights disappeared and the road turned to gravel. We stopped by a field, lay down under the sky, and said nothing. Just two friends breathing in the dark. After a while, he said, "You know, you're not running anymore. I can feel it." That's when I knew healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering differently. You start to see the moments that hurt you, not as curses, but as teachers. You start to understand that love isn't always about staying. Sometimes it's about releasing both of you to grow. I realized that the woman I almost married wasn't my enemy. She was a mirror. She reflected all the parts of me I hadn't yet made peace with. And when she left, she took the illusion with her. That night, when I came back from that drive with Taehyung, I found the letter at my doorstep. It was from her. I never told anyone this before. It wasn't angry or bitter. It was gentle. She wrote, "Thank you for being honest before it was too late. You didn't break my heart. You gave me back my freedom to find where I belong." I sat there for hours reading that line over and over. Freedom. That word echoed in my mind until I realized we both got free the moment I stopped pretending. I don't share this to romanticize pain. I share it because sometimes love matures into truth, not togetherness. And if you've ever had to let someone go even though you love them, you know how excruciating that truth can be. But you also know it's the only way to find real peace. A few weeks later, we had a fan event in Seoul. I went on stage, smiled, waved, and looked out into the ocean of light sticks. But this time, something felt different. I wasn't performing for approval anymore. I was connecting. I looked at their faces, people who had supported me since I was a kid, and I thought, you've seen me through every season. Maybe now it's time I start seeing myself, too. That's when I said something unplanned into the mic. Don't ever feel like it's too late to start again. Even if you think you've lost everything, you haven't lost yourself. The crowd went silent. then erupted. And in that moment, I realized the message I was giving them was also the one I needed to hear. Yoongi later told me that was the most honest you've ever sounded. And maybe it was, because honesty has a frequency. You can't fake it. People don't just hear it, they feel it. Over time, I noticed something changing between all of us. The members started opening up more, too. Our conversations weren't just about work or music anymore. They were about fears, faith, and what kind of men we wanted to become. We'd stay up late in studios, not recording, just talking. Sometimes we'd laugh until our stomachs hurt. Other times we'd sit in silence, letting the weight of our shared journey settle between us. That's when it hit me. BTS wasn't just a group. It was a living reminder that purpose doesn't disappear when plans fall apart. It evolves. The love I lost taught me something the stage never could, that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with your own soul. You can't give what you don't have. You can't love others when you're at war with yourself. And the more I healed, the more I saw Jimin differently. Not as the reason I canceled my wedding, but as the reason I woke up from the illusion I was trapped in. His honesty had cut me open, but it also set me free. Sometimes God uses the people closest to us to break the walls we built too perfectly. It hurts. It feels like betrayal. But later, you realize it was grace in disguise. I started praying again. Not for success or love, just for clarity. And you know what I realized? Clarity isn't a destination. It's a practice. Every morning, you wake up and choose truth over comfort, growth over image, peace over performance. And every time you do, the fog lifts a little more. If you're still listening right now, maybe you're standing in the fog too, wondering where to go, who to trust, what to let go of. I can't give you all the answers, but I can tell you this. The fact that you're still searching means you haven't given up. And that's everything. The world may tell you that endings define you, but I promise beginnings are born from those same ashes. I found that out the day I stopped chasing perfection and started chasing purpose. And that's what I want to talk about next. The moment I realized purpose isn't something you find, it's something you become. Stay with me. I used to think purpose was something you discovered, like a treasure hidden beneath years of struggle. I thought one day, maybe after enough success or heartbreak, it would just reveal itself. But I was wrong. Purpose isn't found. It's built brick by brick, from every decision you make when no one's watching. After the wedding was called off, the silence became my teacher. I stopped running to fill it. I let it echo. And inside that silence, I heard questions I'd ignored for years. Why are you doing this? Who are you trying to prove it to? For the first time, I realized that so much of my life had been about proving I deserved to be loved. To fans, to family, to myself. Every song, every performance, every perfect smile was my way of saying, please don't leave. But love built on performance is exhausting. It's not love. It's negotiation. And eventually, it collapses. One morning, I walked into the studio and found Namjoon there. He was reading, coffee beside him, sunlight slanting across the floor. Without looking up, he said, "You look lighter." I smiled, maybe because I finally stopped pretending. He nodded. That's when you start to live. We talked for hours about what it means to live, not as idols, but as men flawed, real, still growing. Namjoon said something that stuck with me. Purpose is when your pain finally meets someone else's healing. It sounded abstract then, but later I understood. The music we make, the stories we share, they aren't about perfection. They're bridges between broken hearts. I carried that thought with me for weeks. Every time I felt lost, I'd remember that purpose isn't about fame or control. It's about connection. Then, one evening, I visited Yoongi. His studio was dark except for the monitor glow. He was producing something, headphones half on, lost in the rhythm. I sat on the couch and listened. It was a beat, low and haunting, like footsteps in rain. He stopped, turned around, and said, "Do you ever wonder if pain has a sound?" I said, "Maybe this is it." He laughed softly. "Maybe, but the thing about pain is it teaches rhythm. You move differently after it." That line stayed with me. Because he was right, pain changes your rhythm. It slows you down in some ways and sharpens you in others. You start noticing small things again. The warmth in someone's laugh, the quiet in someone's presence, the peace in solitude. Around that time, I began spending more time with J-Hope. We'd walk along the Han River at night, hoodies up, no one noticing us. He'd always say, "Keep moving, even when it's small. Stillness is good, but don't let it turn into stagnation." That reminded me of something he told me years ago. When you dance, don't try to impress, just express. I realized that's how I needed to live, not to impress anyone, but to express what's real. It was in those quiet, unplanned moments that I started finding my purpose again, not as Jungkook the artist or Jungkook the almost groom, but Jungkook the human. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you did something that made you feel alive, not admired? When did you last create something just for the joy of it, not for applause, not for approval, just because it made your heart beat faster? If you can't remember, maybe it's time to start again. I picked up a sketchbook and started drawing. They weren't good, but it didn't matter. It wasn't about being good. It was about being honest. Sometimes healing starts with the simplest things, the things that remind you that you're still capable of wonder. One night, Taehyung came over with his guitar. He said, "Let's play something without thinking." We jammed for hours, random chords, unfinished melodies, nonsense lyrics. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It reminded me that the beauty of music, like life, isn't in flawless notes, but in honest ones. A few days later, Jimin texted me, just one line. "You seem different." I didn't reply right away, but later that night, I wrote back. Maybe I finally stopped living from fear. That's when it hit me. I'd been afraid of silence, afraid of stillness, afraid of losing control. But when I stopped running, I realized silence isn't the enemy. It's the space where truth speaks the loudest. Sometimes we wait for big signs, miracles, revelations, clarity, but life changes in quiet decisions. The decision to forgive, to let go, to show up, to breathe again. There was one moment, weeks later, when everything came full circle. We were rehearsing for a show, and during break, I saw Jimin sitting alone, looking out at the empty seats. I walked up to him and said, "Thank you." He looked confused. For what? For asking the question that saved me. He didn't say anything, just smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't need words. In that moment, I realized how often love hides in silence, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet one that stays when the noise fades. The truth is, I don't regret what happened. I don't wish I'd done it differently. Because every heartbreak, every detour, every quiet night taught me something essential, that purpose doesn't appear when life is easy. It shows up when everything you thought mattered falls apart and you're forced to rebuild from what's real. If you're listening right now, maybe you're in that place. Maybe something ended, a relationship, a dream, a version of yourself. Maybe you feel lost, wondering what's next. Let me tell you this, it's not over. The pain you're feeling isn't punishment, it's preparation. The universe doesn't close doors to punish you, it closes them to redirect you. The same way I had to lose what looked perfect to find what was true, maybe you're being guided too. You just don't see the full picture yet. And I know it's hard to trust the unseen, but trust it anyway. Because one day, you'll look back and realize everything you thought was breaking you was actually building you. That's the thing about purpose. It's not in the spotlight. It's in the shadows, where you learn to dance without an audience, sing without applause, and love without needing to be seen. That's the lesson I learned in the aftermath of what I once thought was my biggest mistake. And the next chapter began when I finally shared that lesson with the world. Not in interviews or headlines, but in a single song that changed everything. Stay with me. When I wrote that song, I didn't plan to release it. It was too personal, too raw. It wasn't made for charts or streams. It was a confession disguised as melody. I called it The Quiet Before Dawn. It wasn't about heartbreak or love. It was about what happens after. The emptiness, the reflection, the moment when silence becomes sacred instead of suffocating. I recorded it late one night. Just me, a piano, and a single light glowing above the microphone. No production, no perfection, only truth. When I finished, I played it back, and something strange happened. I didn't cry, I didn't smile. I just sat there and listened, realizing that for the first time, my voice didn't sound like it was trying to prove anything. It was just me. A few days later, I played it for the members. The room was quiet, everyone listening intently. The song wasn't long, maybe 3 minutes, When it ended, no one said anything for a while. Then Jin spoke first, his voice soft. "That's not a song," he said. "That's healing." Yoongi nodded. "That's what music's supposed to sound like. Not perfect, but honest." And then Jimin, he just looked at me. No words, no smile. Just that knowing expression he always has when he feels something deeper than words can express. Later that night, he texted me. "I knew you'd find your way back through music. You always do." That message stayed with me, because he was right. Every time I've lost myself, music brought me home. Not fame, not approval, not success. Music, the pure act of creating from pain, turning wounds into rhythm, confusion into clarity. I started performing The Quiet Before Dawn during rehearsals, but only when the studio was empty. One evening, Taehyung walked in quietly, sat down in the corner, and listened. When I finished, he said, "You sound like peace." Peace, such a simple word, but it carried so much weight because I hadn't felt it in so long. After that, something shifted inside me. I began to see everything differently. The fans, the stage, even the past. I realized that the engagement, the heartbreak, all of it had been part of the same lesson. You can't build your future on someone else's idea of peace. You have to find your own rhythm. Let me ask you something. What's your rhythm right now? Is your life moving to a beat that belongs to you, or are you still dancing to the expectations of others? Because here's the truth. Living for others sounds noble, but it's slow self-erasure. You disappear one compromise at a time. When I understood that, I started making changes. I stopped agreeing to things that drained me. I stopped apologizing for being quiet, for needing time alone. I even started saying no to opportunities that didn't align with who I was becoming. It scared people. It even scared me, but that's how I knew it was right. Growth should stretch you, not strangle you. Namjoon once told me, "Peace isn't passive. It's an active choice." He was right. Every day, I had to choose it to protect it, nurture it, and guard it from noise. But peace doesn't mean isolation. It means connection without losing yourself. It means being close to people who lift your spirit, not drain your energy. That's what BTS became for me. Again, not just a band, but a brotherhood built on truth. There was one night, one I'll never forget. We were in Busan for a private charity concert. After the show, the 7 of us sat backstage, tired but happy. The lights were dim, the air smelled like sweat and rain. J-Hope leaned back and said, "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" No one answered right away. We just looked at each other. 7 faces, 7 journeys, 7 storms. Then Jimin whispered, "We didn't just survive, we evolved." That hit me like a wave. Because survival is easy, you just keep breathing. But evolving, that takes courage. That takes breaking the version of yourself the world applauds to become the version only your soul recognizes. That night, we didn't talk about fame or numbers. We talked about faith, about family, about the kind of men we wanted to be when the stage lights fade forever. Taehyung said, "When this is all over, I just want to be proud of who I became." Jin said, "I want to laugh without pretending." Yoongi said, "I want to leave behind peace, not pressure." And I said, "I want to be remembered as someone who never stopped growing." The room went silent after that, but it wasn't heavy silence. It was sacred. It was the kind of quiet that means something's changing deep beneath the surface. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, I walked outside into the rain. The city lights blurred in the puddles. I stood there for a long time, feeling the water hit my skin, and I realized I wasn't mourning anymore. I was grateful. Grateful for what ended because it gave birth to what began. Sometimes endings aren't failures. They're invitations. Invitations to become someone new. And I think that's what my story really is. Not about a wedding that never happened, but about a man learning to stop performing and start existing. If you're still here listening, maybe you've had your own version of that. Maybe you've had to cancel something that everyone else thought was right. A relationship, a plan, a dream, and you felt guilty for doing it. But listen carefully. You don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing peace. You don't need permission to protect your soul. You're allowed to walk away from what drains you. You're allowed to outgrow what once fit you. And you're allowed to start again, quietly, gently, without apology. Jimin reminded me of that truth, but I had to live it to understand it. The hardest goodbyes aren't the ones between two people. They're between who you were and who you're becoming. And when you finally let go of who you used to be, something incredible happens. The world doesn't end. It expands. That expansion is what I want to talk about next. The moment my pain turned into purpose, and how one decision changed not just my life, but the way I see love forever. Stay with me. Pain doesn't vanish. It transforms. That's something I didn't understand until much later. For months after everything happened, I kept waiting for the ache to fade. I thought one morning I'd wake up, and it would all feel distant, like a dream that finally let go. But pain doesn't work like that. It doesn't leave. It evolves into meaning, into empathy, into art. There was a morning when I woke up and realized something small but powerful. I wasn't hurting anymore. I was remembering. There's a difference. Remembering carries peace inside it. Hurting still fights to forget. That day, I stopped fighting. I decided to let the memories stay, but I changed what they meant to me. That shift changed everything. I began to look at the people around me differently, not as members of a group, not as colleagues or even friends, but as mirrors of what love really looks like in different forms. Jin's humor reminded me that laughter is medicine. Yoongi's honesty reminded me that truth is a kindness. Namjoon's wisdom reminded me that purpose grows best in quiet reflection. Hoseok's light reminded me that joy is a choice, not a condition. Taehyung's loyalty reminded me that love doesn't need to speak loudly to be real. And Jimin reminded me that sometimes love is correction, not comfort. That realization broke something open inside me. I stopped asking why the wedding didn't happen and started asking what it was trying to teach me. Maybe it wasn't meant to be a union of two people. Maybe it was meant to be the moment I finally reunited with myself. Around that time, I started journaling, not about fame, not about regrets, but about gratitude. Every night before bed, I'd write 3 things I was thankful for, no matter how small. The smell of coffee, a message from a friend, the sound of rain. Gratitude didn't erase the pain, but it shifted my focus. It made me realize that healing isn't about avoiding the dark, it's about noticing the light that's still left. I remember one night, I was sitting on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker like 1,000 beating hearts. Jimin called. His voice was soft, calm. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm better," I said. He paused. "You sound like it." That short exchange meant more than any apology ever could, because forgiveness doesn't always come in dramatic conversations. Sometimes it comes in quiet understanding, in the way you can talk again without the heaviness in your chest. You see, the thing about love is that it doesn't always leave when the relationship ends. It changes its form. It becomes care, distance, prayer. It becomes the invisible thread that still connects you to someone. Not out of need, but gratitude. And I learned to be grateful for her, for the lessons, for the way she unknowingly redirected my path back to myself. If you're listening right now, maybe you've lost something or someone you thought you couldn't live without. Maybe you've been blaming yourself or wishing you could rewind time. But let me tell you this, nothing that's meant for you will ever require you to betray your truth to keep it. If you had to become someone else to stay, it wasn't love, it was attachment. Love will never demand you to shrink. It will ask you to rise. The more I healed, the more I started noticing how our culture glorifies endurance, staying, surviving, holding on as if leaving means weakness. But I think the bravest thing anyone can do is to walk away from something beautiful when it stops being right. Because it's easy to hold on to what you know. It's hard to release what once made you happy. There's this quiet heroism in choosing to start over when no one's cheering for you anymore. I started channeling all of that into music. Not songs about romance, but songs about evolution, about the pain of growth, the dignity of solitude, the beauty of letting go. One of those songs, Still Breathing, became my personal anthem. It wasn't about survival, it was about rebirth. I'll never forget performing it for the first time. The stage was dark except for one spotlight. As I sang, I saw faces in the crowd, not just fans, but souls who had walked through their own kind of fire. And when I sang the line, "I'm still breathing, not broken, just becoming," something in the audience shifted. People started crying. I felt it, the shared release, the collective exhale. After the show, a woman in her 50s came up to me, tears in her eyes. She said, I lost everything last year, but your song reminded me that maybe I didn't lose myself. That's when I understood what Namjoon meant purpose is when your pain meets someone else's healing. That night, I went home and texted the members. Thank you for never letting me drown quietly. Taehyung replied first. That's what brothers are for. Jin sent a heart emoji. Hoseok said, keep shining, golden one. Yoongi just wrote, proud of you. And Jimin, he simply sent one word, finally. That word said everything. Sometimes we think healing is this huge event, a moment of revelation, a dramatic breakthrough. But it's not. It's subtle. It's the day you stop checking their profile. The day you stop rehearsing the conversation you'll never have. The day you smile without guilt. Healing is ordinary. It's quiet, but it's real. And once you've tasted that kind of peace, you can't go back to pretending. The beautiful thing about starting over is that you begin to love differently, more carefully, but also more freely. You no longer love to fill a void, you love because you're full. You love because you finally understand that connection isn't about possession, it's about recognition. You see someone's soul, and they see yours, and there's no need to perform. That's the kind of love I'm waiting for now. Not perfect, not loud, but true. And when that day comes, I won't be afraid. Because now I know love isn't supposed to complete you. It's supposed to accompany you while you're already complete. If you're still here, maybe this message is meant for you. Maybe you've been through your own ending, your own moment of silence. Maybe you've been asking why, but what if the why doesn't matter anymore? What if what matters is what you do next? Don't rush to fill the space. Let it breathe. Let it teach you. Because the emptiness you feel right now isn't punishment. It's preparation for the new life that's quietly forming within you. Stay with me, because what happened next, the moment I decided to speak publicly for the first time about everything changed, not just my image, but my entire understanding of what it means to be human. Stay. The first time I spoke about it publicly, I didn't plan to. It happened during an interview, one of those long-form ones where the lights feel too bright and the air feels too heavy. The interviewer asked me about change. You've grown a lot, she said. But what moment in your life made you question everything? For a split second, I froze. I could have given a safe answer, something about fame, or burnout, or creativity. But the truth was burning at the back of my throat, and I realized I didn't want to hide behind polite words anymore. So I told her. I said, there was a time last year when I almost got married, and a week before the wedding, I called it off. The room went silent, camera still rolling, crew frozen. The interviewer's face softened, but she didn't interrupt. She just let me continue. I spoke slowly, not to sound dramatic, but because each word carried a weight I hadn't felt in so long. It wasn't because I stopped loving her, I said. It was because I realized I hadn't learned how to love myself. You could feel the entire energy shift. Suddenly, it wasn't an interview anymore. It was a confession. I talked about the pressure to always seem in control, about the fear of disappointing people, about the loneliness that comes when your success becomes a prison. And then I mentioned Jimin. I said, it was actually Jimin who asked me the question that changed everything. The interviewer leaned forward. What did he ask? I smiled. He asked if I was sure this was what my heart wanted, or just what my image wanted. For a moment, my voice trembled, because saying it out loud made it real again, the confusion, the pain, the silence that followed. But I kept going. I got angry at him, I admitted. I thought he was trying to ruin something good. But now I realize, he saved me from living a lie. Sometimes love comes from the people who challenge you, not the ones who agree with you. That line wasn't rehearsed. It just came out like my heart had been waiting for years to breathe. When the interview aired, the response was overwhelming. People weren't gossiping, they were relating. Thousands of messages poured in from fans who said they'd made similar choices. People who walked away from relationships, jobs, even versions of themselves that weren't true anymore. And they all said the same thing. Your story made me feel less alone. That's when I understood something. Profound vulnerability is contagious. When you speak your truth, you give others permission to speak theirs. After that, I started talking about it more. Not as scandal, not as drama, but as transformation. During concerts, I'd tell the fans, you don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to stay honest. The crowd would roar, but I could feel it. They didn't just hear the words, they felt them. I think that's what art really is, a mirror for someone else's truth. When you tell your story authentically, it becomes a space where others can find their own reflection. Behind the scenes, the members watched how all of this unfolded. One night after a show, we gathered in the dressing room. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens when everyone's heart is full. Jin looked at me and said, "You know, you could have hidden it forever, but you didn't. That's strength." Yoongi added, "The moment you turned your pain into purpose, it stopped controlling you." And Jimin, sitting across from me, simply said, "You were always meant to tell it, you just didn't know when." We sat there for a long time, not saying much else. Sometimes the silence between brothers says more than words ever could. After that night, something inside me shifted again. It wasn't pride, it was peace. The kind of peace that comes from realizing your scars aren't signs of weakness, they're proof that you survived. You see, people often think healing means erasing the past. But I've learned the opposite. Healing means carrying it differently, not as a burden, but as wisdom. When you hide your wounds, they fester. But when you share them, they become medicine not just for you, but for everyone who listens. Let me ask you something. What story are you still afraid to tell? What truth have you been hiding because you think people won't understand? Because I promise you this, the moment you share it, you'll realize you were never alone. Someone out there is waiting to heal through your story. The days that followed that interview were strange. The world saw me differently, more human, more flawed, more real. And honestly, that was freeing. Because I was tired of being seen as untouchable. I didn't want perfection anymore. I wanted connection. The irony is, the more honest I became, the more people connected with me. It's like the world doesn't want your mask. It wants your heartbeat. That realization deepened my bond with the members too. We started talking about things we never used to fear: aging, identity, purpose. BTS stopped being a stage act. It became a family meeting disguised as music. One day, Namjoon said something that stayed with me. Maybe the reason we were put together wasn't just to sing, but to remind the world that vulnerability is power. He was right. Because strength isn't how loud you can shout. It's how soft you can stay after being hurt. There was a moment, a few weeks later, when Jimin and I stood on stage together during rehearsals. We weren't talking, just standing there under the lights. He looked at me and said, "You look lighter." I said, "Maybe because I finally stopped running from myself." He smiled. "Then you finally found what we've all been searching for." "What's that?" I asked. "Peace." That word again, peace. It kept finding me in different forms, like it was chasing me until I finally let it in. When the rehearsal ended, I stayed behind. The lights dimmed, the arena empty, and I looked at the seats where thousands would soon sit. I whispered quietly, "Thank you." I didn't even know who I was, thanking maybe God, maybe fate, maybe the version of myself who didn't give up when it all fell apart. And in that stillness, I understood the truth I'd been chasing all along. Love doesn't always look like forever. Sometimes it looks like freedom. If you're still here, maybe that's what you need to hear today. Maybe your story isn't about what ended, but what began after. Maybe you're standing at the edge of a decision, afraid of what people will think if you choose yourself. Do it anyway, because peace isn't found in approval, it's found in alignment. And that's what I want to share next. The night everything came full circle, when the same question that once broke me returned, but this time, it set me free. Stay with me. It happened one night after a show in Tokyo. The city was glowing beneath us, neon lights trembling on wet asphalt after a light rain. We'd just finished a performance that felt more like a prayer than a concert. The crowd was electric, but my mind was somewhere else. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the quiet after too much applause. But I felt something stirring again, that familiar whisper from within. After the show, everyone went their separate ways. Some went back to the hotel, others to eat, but I stayed behind. I walked through the empty corridors of the arena until I reached the stage again. The seats were empty now, the lights dimmed, just silence and the faint echo of everything we just lived. I sat on the edge of the stage and looked out, imagining all those faces that had just been there, smiling, crying, singing. And then, out of nowhere, I heard footsteps behind me. "Jimin?" He didn't say anything at first. He just sat beside me, our shoulders barely touching. For a while, we watched the empty arena together. Then he said quietly, "Do you ever think about that night?" I didn't have to ask which one. I nodded slowly. "All the time." He let out a breath. "You know, I used to wonder if I did the right thing saying that to you. I thought maybe I overstepped. I turned to him. No, I said. You didn't overstep. You intervened. He looked at me with that same calm, searching gaze, the one that used to make me uncomfortable because it saw through everything. And now, he asked, do you regret it? I smiled. Not anymore. It took me a while, but I finally understand. You weren't trying to stop my happiness. You were trying to save my soul. He looked down, then back at me. You were losing yourself, Jungkook. I couldn't just watch that happen. There it was, the full circle. The question that once broke me was now setting me free. Are you sure this is what your heart wants? Back then, I thought it was judgment. Now, I know it was love in its purest form, the kind that doesn't flatter. It frees. We sat there in silence. Not the heavy kind, but the sacred kind. The kind that only exists between people who've walked through fire and come out cleaner on the other side. After a while I said, you know, if I had gone through with that wedding, I think I would have spent the rest of my life wondering why I felt so empty inside. Jimin nodded. Because you were trying to love someone while forgetting how to love yourself. That sentence hit me deep. Because that's what I had done. I'd mistaken commitment for connection. I wanted to be the kind of man who gives everything. But I forgot that love without wholeness becomes dependence, not devotion. You can't give what you don't have. And I didn't have peace back then. He smiled softly. Now you do. I looked out over the empty seats again and whispered, yeah, now I do. That night, something shifted forever between us. We didn't talk about the past again. We didn't need to. The silence had said enough. When I got back to my hotel room, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The same face, same eyes, but different energy. I wasn't pretending anymore. For years, I've been chasing validation from the world, from love, from success, but for the first time, I didn't need it. I just wanted to be true. I sat by the window, watching the city flicker, and thought about how strange life is. Sometimes, what feels like destruction is actually transformation. The things we lose aren't always punishments. Sometimes they're the clearing we need to build something real. Let me ask you something. Have you ever thanked the pain that once broke you? Have you ever looked back and realized that what you called loss was actually liberation? If you haven't, try it. Because gratitude doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. I wrote in my journal that night, maybe we don't find peace by avoiding pain, but by walking through it without letting it turn us bitter. That became my mantra. The next morning, I woke up to a message from Namjoon. It said, proud of how you're living, not just how you're performing. I didn't reply, I didn't need to. He knew. They all did. We flew back to Korea a few days later. On the plane, everyone was asleep except me and Taehyung. He looked at me and said, you seem quiet. I smiled. It's not quiet, it's peace. He nodded, leaned back, and said, then you're finally where you were meant to be. As the plane crossed through the clouds, I stared out the window, watching the sunlight bleed into the horizon. And I thought maybe that's what healing looks like. Not dramatic, not loud, just light slowly finding its way back in. When we landed, I went straight to visit my parents. My mother hugged me for a long time, the kind of hug that says more than words. My father looked at me and said, you seem different. I am, I said. We had dinner together, laughed, talked about simple things, the weather, the neighbors, my dogs. It was peaceful. I realized how long it had been since I'd allowed myself to just be their son instead of the man the world watched. Before I left, my mother said something that stayed with me. Don't rush into love again, Jungkook. When it's right, it won't ask you to change who you are. I smiled and said, I know. And for the first time, I truly did. That evening, I went to the studio alone. I turned off all the lights and sat in the dark, listening to the faint hum of the city outside. I thought about everything. The canceled wedding, the sleepless nights, the brothers who stood by me, the fans who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. And then, like it always does, music came. I opened my laptop, played a few chords, and started humming. Words flowed naturally, not polished, not perfect, just honest. It became a new song called Still Here. It wasn't about regret or heartbreak. It was about endurance, about surviving yourself, about standing in the ruins of who you were, and realizing you're still breathing, still growing, still becoming. When I finished recording the demo, I sat there for a long time, just listening. And then I whispered to myself, This is who you are now. If you're listening right now, maybe you need to tell yourself the same thing. Maybe you've been stuck in the story of who you were, the one who made mistakes, who fell, who broke, but you're not that person anymore. You're the one who survived. You're still here. And sometimes that's enough. Stay with me. Because what happened after still here, what came next, was something I never expected. It was the moment when life tested everything I'd learned. And Jimin reminded me again that love, in its purest form, isn't about staying. It's about standing with someone while they face their truth. Stay. The moment life tested everything I thought I'd learned came quietly. The way storms sometimes begin with nothing more than still air. It was a winter afternoon in Seoul gray sky. Faint drizzle. The kind of day that makes you reflect whether you want to or not. We were preparing for a small, intimate performance, just the 7 of us. A stripped-down acoustic session. No pyrotechnics, no rehearsed smiles, only bare voices and raw truth. Before rehearsal, Jimin asked if we could talk. His tone was careful, gentle, almost hesitant. We stepped outside, the cold air biting against our skin. He said, "There's something you should know before we start." I nodded. He looked down at his hands. "I ran into her a few weeks ago, the one you almost married." The world didn't spin, it just went quiet. My chest tightened, not from anger or jealousy, but from a strange curiosity. He continued, "She asked how you were. I told her you seemed at peace. She said she's glad." That was all. Just that. But it hit me in waves. For months, I'd carried that story like a closed book, afraid to open it again. Yet hearing her name from Jimin's mouth felt different. It didn't sting anymore. It didn't pull me backward. It simply existed like a memory that no longer controlled the present. I said, "Thank you for telling me." He nodded, relieved. Then, after a pause, he said, "She seemed free too." And for some reason, that made me smile. Because freedom was the only gift worth giving each other in the end. Inside, the others were tuning instruments, laughing softly. Taehyung strummed a chord. Hoseok hummed along. The atmosphere was warm, human. And in that warmth, I realized healing doesn't mean you forget. It means you can face what once broke you without flinching. We started rehearsing a new arrangement of Still Here. Halfway through, I looked over at Jimin. Our eyes met, and something wordless passed between us. Acknowledgement, maybe even gratitude. The song wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to all of us, woven from every bruise, every forgiveness, every unspoken prayer. After rehearsal, Namjoon pulled me aside. "You handled that well," he said. I shrugged. "I think it's the first time I actually believed I was okay." He smiled. "That's growth, not luck." That night, I went home and replayed everything in my mind. The rain, her name, Jimin's honesty. For the first time, I saw the entire arc of it clearly. Not a tragedy, but a training ground for peace. Every heartbreak, every question, every tear had been sculpting me into someone more aware, more alive. Let me ask you something. Have you ever realized that the closure you were waiting for wasn't a conversation with someone else, but a moment inside yourself? The day you stop asking, "Why me?" and start saying, "Thank you," that's the day you heal. I wrote those words down in my journal. Thank you for ending what wasn't meant to last, so I could become who I'm meant to be. Weeks later, we filmed that acoustic session. The camera crew set up softly, almost reverently. When it was my turn to sing, I looked into the lens and imagined all the people listening, those carrying their own unfinished stories. I didn't perform, I confessed. Every lyric was a bridge, from my heart to theirs. When the video went live, messages poured in again. But this time, they felt different. People weren't just reacting, they were reflecting. A man in his 60s wrote, "I divorced last year. I thought my life was over. But your song made me realize I still have time to grow." A teenager said, "I ended a friendship that was killing me, and your words helped me breathe again." That's when I finally understood. The purpose of pain is to make you human enough to guide others out of theirs. Months passed. Life slowed down. I spent more time outdoors, taking long walks, watching the seasons shift. One evening, I was sitting by the Han River again when Jimin joined me. We didn't plan it, it just happened. He handed me a coffee and said, "I saw the comments. You changed people's lives." I shook my head. "We did. You were part of this from the beginning." He smiled, looking out over the water. I only asked a question. Yeah, I said. But sometimes one honest question can save an entire life. We sat there until the sky turned dark. The city lights flickered on, reflecting across the river like 1,000-second chances. I thought about how far we'd come from the boy I was, pretending to be whole, to the man who finally learned that honesty is the highest form of love. I turned to Jimin and said, "You know what's strange? I used to think my story ended that night I called off the wedding. But it didn't end, it began." He nodded slowly. Most beginnings look like endings at first. And he was right. Because everything I'd lost had quietly become everything. I'd gained clarity, depth, authenticity. Before we left, Jimin said something I'll never forget. "You're finally loving people the right way now." "How's that?" I asked, "without losing yourself." That night, walking home under the soft hum of city lights, I felt something deeper than happiness. It was wholeness. The kind that doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to prove, it just is. When I reached my apartment, I opened the window and looked at the skyline. Somewhere out there, people were laughing, crying, starting over. And I realized that all of us, famous or not, are just trying to find the same thing: peace after the storm. If you're listening to me right now, I want you to remember this. Your story isn't broken. It's unfolding. Every painful chapter is preparing you for the strength you'll need to write the next one. And the person you'll become on the other side, they're already waiting for you. So keep walking, keep breathing, keep choosing truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Because one day, like me, you'll look back and smile, not because it didn't hurt, but because you finally understand why it had to. And when that day comes, you'll whisper the same words I did under that quiet soul sky. I'm still here. Stay with me. Because in the next chapter, I'll tell you how that peace was tested again this time. Not by love, but by life itself. And how what I learned then reshaped everything I thought I knew about faith, family, and forgiveness. Stay. Peace is fragile when it's new. It moves carefully, like light through cracked glass. Beautiful, but easy to shatter. I didn't know how fragile mine was until life tested it again. Not through heartbreak this time, but through the people who had been with me since the beginning. It happened on an ordinary morning. The group had been discussing new directions, solo work, and time apart. We'd done everything together for so long that even the thought of distance felt like betrayal. The conversation was honest, but heavy. We all knew it was coming, life demanding change, time demanding space. After the meeting, I sat alone in the studio. The walls that once echoed with our laughter now felt like an empty cathedral. I thought about all the years, our youth, our mistakes, the nights we fell asleep on the floor of rehearsal rooms. I thought about how much we'd all changed, not just as artists, but as men. And then I felt that same ache I'd felt before the wedding, the one that asked, "Who are you without everything you've built?" It scared me. Because peace doesn't mean life stops challenging you. It means you stop running from the challenge. That afternoon, Jimin came in quietly. He didn't have to say anything. He just placed a coffee next to me and sat down. After a while, he said, "We've been through so much. Maybe it's time we trust that what we've built won't break, even if we stand a little apart." He was right. Growth sometimes means walking in different directions without losing sight of each other. That night, we all gathered at the dorm for dinner, something we hadn't done in months. Jin cooked, of course. Hoseok played music. Namjoon poured tea. The air was warm, full of nostalgia and quiet gratitude. At one point, Taehyung said, "Do you ever think we'd still be here after everything?" Yoongi smiled, rare and soft. "We're not here after everything," he said. "We're here because of everything." We laughed, but his words sank deep, because it was true. Every struggle, every argument, every tear had built the foundation beneath us. It reminded me of something I once wrote in my journal. The strongest bonds are forged in honesty, not perfection. When the night ended, I lingered after everyone left. The apartment was quiet, only the hum of the refrigerator and the faint echo of laughter lingering in the air. I sat on the couch and looked around. Every corner held memories. The scuffed wall from our first dance practice, the couch where I fell asleep during late night edits, the kitchen where we celebrated birthdays. It all came rushing back, how far we'd come, how many times we thought it was over, how many times we were wrong. That's when I realized something simple but profound. Peace isn't something you achieve once and keep forever. It's something you recommit to every day. You protect it, nurture it, rebuild it when life tries to take it away. Let me ask you something. Have you ever found peace only to feel it slipping through your fingers again? Did you think you'd failed, that you'd gone backward? You didn't. You were just being reminded that peace isn't a place, it's a practice. A few weeks later, I went back to Busan to visit my childhood home. My parents were waiting at the door, smiling like they always do. My mom hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "You look good," she said. "I feel good," I replied. And I meant it. That evening, I walked alone to the beach near our old neighborhood. The air was cool, the waves soft. I stood there watching the tide come in, and it felt like time itself was breathing with me. I thought about that version of me from a year ago, the one planning a wedding, wearing a smile that didn't fit, convincing the world he was fine. I thought about how far he'd come to reach this silence. And for the first time, I didn't pity him. I thanked him, because he carried me here. I picked up a small stone from the shore and wrote a single word on it with my finger. Peace. Then I tossed it into the sea and whispered, "Keep it moving." When I turned around, Jimin was there. I don't know how long he'd been watching. He smiled, hands in his pockets. "Still writing messages to the ocean?" he teased. I laughed. "Someone has to listen." He walked closer. "You know," he said, "if you hadn't called it off, I think you'd still be pretending." I nodded. "I know. And I think if you hadn't asked that question, I never would have woken up." We stood there in silence, the kind that feels like a prayer. Then I said, "You were the beginning of my freedom. You know that?" He shook his head. "No, you were. I just handed you the mirror." That's when it hit me fully, the entire journey. All of it. Wasn't about the wedding, or regret, or even love. It was about truth. The courage to look into the mirror, see what's real, and still choose to keep growing. We started walking back together, the sound of the waves fading behind us. The air was light, almost sacred. Before we reached the road, Jimin said softly, "I hope one day you find someone who doesn't just love you for who you are, but for who you're still becoming." I smiled. Me too. We didn't say anything else after that. We didn't need to. The journey had already said everything. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I thought about all the people who had been part of my story. The woman I almost married, the brothers who stood beside me, the fans who stayed through my silence, the man in the mirror who finally forgave himself. And I realized this. Peace doesn't mean the absence of pain. It means the presence of understanding. Everything had led to this moment. Every broken plan, every quiet night, every tear had carved space for something new, something truer. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." For Jimin. For the lesson. For the love that asked me to wake up. And somewhere in that stillness, I felt it again, the same warmth that started this whole story. Not guilt, not fear, just gratitude. If you're listening right now, I want you to take a breath and remember this. Sometimes life will break your heart to save your soul. And the people who challenge you the most are often the ones who love you the deepest. So don't run from the truth. Let it find you, even if it arrives as pain. Because one day, like me, you'll look back and realize you didn't lose anything. You were simply being rewritten into someone new. And that, my friend, is the most beautiful kind of love story there is. Stay honest, stay growing, stay free. Because even after everything, after all the storms, all the silence, all the surrender, I'm still here. And so are you.